Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to take you to Africa to uncover some mechanisms of the financially motivated threat groups that are operating there to conduct the cyber heists. And you may ask, why such topic? Why not another APT intrusions topic? So mainly, it was because when I joined the private sector, actually the international bank, I was challenged by the new for me threat landscape. The company I work for is present in many global markets, also Africa. So I was interested, what are the risks, what are the threats in Africa? And I found this fascinating for me topic that I would like to share with you today. So let's go to Kenya, where most of those prolific groups operate and try to familiarize with the modus operandi of those groups. So agenda for today. So let's begin with understanding the African kill chain, because this is something very unique. Their tactics are quite unique for the region, for the groups that operate there. And later on, we'll focus on the threat landscape, and we'll then try to learn what differentiate those groups, how can we cluster them, because although there is one common African kill chain, those groups also differentiate from each other, and we'll try to understand how they could be clustered. And also we'll learn something about the history of the development of those groups, what happened in the past to understand the current threats. And lastly, third part would be 2 case studies, the more focus on the Python Keyloggers, and also the analysis of capabilities and infrastructure of one of the threat groups named GrabZone. And here we will look in more details. So just a few words about me. Kuba asked why it happened, how I joined IT security. So like I said, 16 years ago, I joined the Navy and ended in National Cybersecurity Center, Poland. Then I left the military sector, joined the private sector, and currently I'm now cyber threat intelligence senior manager at Standard Chartered Bank. I have always been incident response forensic man, but probably you would like to know also what does it mean to be a threat intel analyst. So actually, threat intel analyst is somebody who tries to connect the dots, somebody who wants to find a pattern, track the threats. Often it is very similar to searching the needle in the haystack, and very often you don't find the needle and you got lost in the rabbit hole, but sometimes you can find it, you can find the pattern and find great satisfaction in tracking threats, threat groups, and often stopping their operations. So that's about me. Let's focus on Africa. Oh, disclaimer that opinions and assessments presented are solely my own and do not represent my employer's position. And the investigation, the case studies here are based on the publicly available data. However, most of the samples, the clustering of threat groups and their naming convention is thanks to Onet Services. And this is the company organization that is Kenya-based, and they are really tracking the threats. Actually, their blog was inspiration to my research, and I try to follow their blog, and many of the sources from these presentations are based on their operations. They are not only incident responders that help the organization victims in East Africa, but they are also conducting a very unique government authorized offensive actions against threats. This is very fascinating. They gain many of the samples of the threat intelligence they gain from offensive actions from their infrastructure. I will have links to their blog here, so and I will recommend generally following them. Very dangerous job also, because they operate there in the region. They are tracking and fighting the groups there. So in this case, this is a very dangerous job. It's not like analyzing very distant threats and publishing information about them, revealing their operations, stopping their operations. Those guys really risk, but they do really good job there. So let's go and try to understand the African kill chain. What is so unique about this kill chain? And we need to understand that they use a lot of the insiders. And usually the initial access to the victim organization is done via the rogue device. So the insider, for example, a bribed personnel, that disgruntled employee is trained, instructed to take special laptop and to attach it to the network of the victim. And usually this is how most of the intrusions begin. So in comparison to the other cyber intrusions that happen in the world, for example, when we compare to APT intrusions, which usually start with the spear phishing, phishing mails. Sometimes there are very wide campaigns and trying to find opportunistic victim. In this case, the intrusions are very targeted. So the insiders are instructed, the whole gang, the whole group is focused on for example, one target. And yeah, and the initial access, you can also find the micro attack technique for that. In the tactic initial access, there is a technique called hardware additions. And if you open a micro attack framework, there's only one example of a threat group that uses that kind of a technique. This also means that even in micro attack, there are not many examples of threat groups that use such methods to access their victim. In the case of micro attack, it is Dark Vishnya group, which is an Eastern European actor that's financially motivated, that hit at least 8 financial institutions in the years 2017-18. And that's all. That's only one example. So it's not very popular. And if you remember presentations from day one, from Jakub and Maciej, very interesting presentations about their physical penetration tests, you may see that those examples and those tests are not very far from reality. Maybe they are not that popular, but for example, if you're a financial institution and you are operating in Africa, you definitely should take under consideration the physical security, the insider threat, and focus on all that. So initial foothold is the rogue device, for example, laptop hidden somewhere, could be even hidden in the server room. There were such cases. So probably you're interested what's specific about this laptop. So usually those laptops are Windows operating, have Windows operating system installed on, so nothing original, but they also have the commercial of the shell remote access tools installed. And you can see the icons here on the slide that they install GoToMyPC, TeamViewer, AnyDesks. So the graphical tools to control the computer remotely. So very easy to operate. And the insiders are trained to how to troubleshoot them, how to connect them. So very basic steps, how to operate those laptops. And also those laptops have suspend, hibernation disabled, so they are operating all the time. Usually they have double network access, so they have their internet connectivity. For example, they are connected to guest Wi-Fi, or they have their internet modem, and with the second leg, they are connected to the internal network. So the group is already in. What happens later? Later, they begin to move laterally. Other tools that are installed on such a laptop are, for example, IP scanners, graphical mode scanners. They often use offensive security tools like Bloodhound or CME toolkit, so crack map exec toolkit for finding weaknesses in Active Directory environments. And of course, when they gather, for example, I don't know, brute forcing passwords or Kerberoasting, when they get credentials, they start to move laterally. How? Of course, they do lateral movement over SMB with the use of old good PS exec. So in that case, they do not differ from even the most prolific APT groups that also use PS exec for such purposes. And later on, something which is very unique to African threat groups is the keylogging. They very often use the Python keyloggers, which were compiled to Windows binary by PyInstaller. And I use here the citation by Phineas Fisher, so another threat actor, from his memo after he hit the hacking team, that in reality, the Mimikatz and Keyloggers view all passwords equally. So they do not usually dump the passwords with any tools. They use the Keyloggers. They install them, and we'll focus on the analysis of the Keyloggers in our case studies section. And a little bit of history. So in 2014, there was a Forkbombo cartel created in Kasarani. Kasarani is a kind of a ghetto area in Nairobi, and also called the cyber criminal Silicon Valley. And there are lots of criminals from Nigeria, from South Africa. That's where they recruit money mules and people to the gang. And it happened in 2014. What is very important, it was created by a man who was a former policeman, and that fact is quite interesting and important, because many of those heists and many of those groups are supported by the corrupted politicians, by the governors. They are also supported by the corrupted policemen. So that's why it is also very hard for defenders to operate against them, and they really risk their lives, because those gangs are not only operating in cyberspace, but they also kill people in the physical world. For example, money mules who are not bringing the money. So let's use the diamond model to analyze the features of such group, and I divided here the Forkbombo cartel into those diamond model features. So it was an East Africa gang formed by the policemen, consisted of many of the smaller teams. So it became a kind of a cartel, big organization. And their capabilities. They used many of the commercial tools for remote access control, like TeamViewer, GoToMyPC, but also the open source tools for offensive security, like Metasploit, PS Empire, and another open source project like Quasarat, which is available at the GitHub. CDUK is not that backdoor from APT29, but it is a kind of a Python backdoor compiled by PyInstaller to Windows executable. Of course, they use the Python keyloggers, and the whole history, if you analyze the history of keyloggers, goes back to the Forkbombo cartel keylogger. We'll analyze it later. They used insiders, very often ICT personnel with access to network and critical assets For infrastructure, they used, for example, Gmail for keylogging. They exfiltrated the locked keystrokes to Gmail, and they targeted banks, SACCOs, so save and credit organizations, and other financial institutions. And they were very prolific. They stole millions of dollars. Later on, in 2017, this group was partly arrested and divided into smaller groups. The cartel divided into smaller Forkbombo group, but also other organizations like Silent Cards, Grab Zone, the Doctors, Telecode, and some of those groups cooperate with each other, and some of them fight each other. And later on, the Forkbombo cartel and turned, for example, into the Grab Zone. And later on, 1 year later, after the arrest of the majority of Forkbombo cartel, they connected with the old money mules to form the Forkbombo group. So those groups are not very stable. They change, they mix. But for example, Grab Zone do not cooperate with the group Silent Cards. And Silent Cards in 2019, they divided into the consultants and the Ruru shepherds. And for example, consultants do not cooperate with Grab Zone. However, Ruru shepherds cooperate with them. And Forkbombo group was terminated at the end of 2019 in Rwanda, and they organized big heists. They tried to target one of the biggest banks in East and Central Africa, and even some members of the Ruru shepherds were with them, and they were also arrested during this heist. So it was a very successful operation for those good cops and for the defenders tracking those threats. And how does it look in 2020? So nothing is static. Those groups like Ruru, Grab Zone, consultants, they are regrouping. Maybe we'll see that they will split or maybe merge their capabilities. There are still the Doctors, there are still Silent Cards, Telecode team, but this is the East Africa threat landscape. And for example, from West Africa, we have the group Corzeta, which is also interesting because there are some links showing that there could be some cooperation with the big cyber threat like TA505, so the group that targets many organizations across the world, not connected with the region. So this is also another topic that could be very interesting to research and to analyze. And this was a history. So if we would like to cluster the groups, let's look, for example, about the Silent Cards and their features. So this is quite big gang, and lots of the members, the core members, for example, like about 20. They also use GoToPC, AnyPC, remote assistance, but they use the CDUC, so the backdoor used formally by the Forkbombo. From the Keyloggers, they use something called Land Cruiser. They use insiders, but they use anyone with access, could be also a janitor. They have very fast operational tempo. So when they enter, they quickly perform the initial withdrawal of the funds. For the infrastructure, they use cloud services a lot. For example, Gmail, FTP, Drive HQ, and they have quite wide targeting. They even target hospitals, insurance, so not only financial institutions, and they have potential to attack several victim organizations at one time. So sometimes they do not only focus on one victim. The consultants are also quite unique. For example, they use another commercial off-the-shelf tool to control this hidden laptop. They use W agent, and they use Python keylogger called Keyloggers. And for infrastructure, of course, this is the infrastructure related to W agent. And apart from banks, circles, and they also target the creditors. And grab zone, and in general, they use different backdoors. They experiment. They use Meterpreter, Caesar Red, which is also open source, PS Empire. So they try to use different capabilities. They use, of course, commercial rats like AnyDesk, Rat, Symbot, a lot of them. Probably because they want to experiment with antivirus detections and they want to try something new that has very low antivirus detection. And that's why they change all those tools. And for Keylogger, for example, they use Hail Mary, which again is very similar to the Keylogger that was invented by the Forkbombo. And they also attack quite widely. And let's go to the first case study about the Python keyloggers. They have one origin, like I mentioned before. And if you look at the main function in this source code of this Python keylogger, you will see the main logic, the main engine of for the keylogger. And this is the part that was probably copied years ago from from the forum. Even the variables were not changed. So the variable HM for hook manager is not changed. And this part actually reoccurs in every Python keylogger from different threat actor, from different AFT group. So this is also part of the code that is repetitive. And for example, you can see that they try to get out the environment variable for username. And later on, this username is used as a file name where the keystrokes are being logged. And this is also very common across those keyloggers. In the content section, you can see that previously the Forkbombo group, and here you can now learn why this group is named Forkbombo, because that was the name of the account, Gmail account for that group. So they used to exfiltrate the keystrokes to Gmail. Now they usually keep them on the machine, on the victim machine, and they exfiltrate those archives over the command and control channel. Here you can see the differences between the Python keyloggers of the consultants and the silent cards. And you can see that there are quite a lot of similarities. Sometimes they differ with some imports. Some have some commented sections to include binary libraries with FTP and to base64 encode some of the parts. The consultants, here you can see that they use this naming convention that they name the archive after the username, so the victim username. However, you can also see that the way they create the log, even the dividing sections is the same. So there are often very slight differences between the keyloggers of different groups. But here I gathered some common artifacts of FAT keyloggers. So usually they are the Python scripts that are compiled to .exe on the Windows executable by the PyInstaller. So when you use PyInstaller for that, usually the file size is about 5 megabytes. So they are not small files in comparison to the functionality. The file names are masquerading known software, for example, OneNote or Adobe or Java, and sometimes they have also the icon. So if there is a keylogger named java.exe, it usually has the Java icon, they are usually located in program data, so the keyloggers, and the logs are saved to program data, user profiles, all user profiles. And this is also quite good threat hunting rule, that it's very wise to look to hunt for files that are created in those locations, because typically on a clean system, there should not be any of the files. There are mainly locations where folders are created, not single files, but very often adversaries use those locations to have a staging area for their files before exfiltration. And it's quite wise to create, for example, threat hunting rules on your EDR system or AV system to hunt for any new files created there. And for example, different groups across time, they used file names based on username, but with different extensions like tar, ini, zip, sys. They changed by mainly were connected with some archive files. And the persistence, there is usually the persistence, very simple persistence that's created by the run keys. So the registry persistence, the simplest way, the simplest technique for that was used before. Is there a possibility to create Yara for detecting such Python keylogger? It's not that trivial, because when in PyInstaller packages the script, it is like one package with all the dependencies, and also it's like a runtime environment, and when it's run, the script is interpreted. So you cannot hunt for any specific keywords from the file, from the decompiled Python script. But for example, like in that case, you can hunt for the imports. So for the specific artifacts connected with the imported libraries of the script. It is not very precise Yara rule for a Yara hunt, but it's quite wide. You do not only catch AFT samples, but it's quite good Yara rule to be deployed to find, in general, Python keylogger. And then when you analyze, reverse engineer it, you can try to understand, and you can apply more specific Yara rules to the final decompiled Python script. Let's go to the case study number 2 and analyze a little bit about the GrabZone infrastructure and their capabilities, especially the newest one that were used and deployed against the victims in 2020. So the inspiration was, like in every case, for African financial threats. I use the term African financial threats, although the original intention by Onet Services was advanced financial threats in Africa. So African financial threats is my translation, maybe not with the intention of the original authors. When you look, for example, in the materials from their workshops, you can find some background interesting information that GrabZone is using new Python 3 backdoor in this year. And you can find the IP address and the port, probably the command control server for this backdoor. So what kind of backdoor it is and what can we learn about this IP? So let's maybe try to dig for a needle in a haystack, and we'll see what can we find, if we can dig, stay in the rabbit hole, or can we find any pattern and something that can be used operationally later, and maybe something, maybe we could uncover something to track those actors. So if you take this IP and analyze it and check it on Showdown, and I don't know if you use Showdown, and I really recommend you use the beta version, because in the beta version you can also use the history So the past scans by Showdown, it is not available in the old web GUI. It has been always accessible via API, via command line, but not from the web GUI. Now it is possible, but only in the beta version of Showdown. So you can see that there are some ports associated not only now, but in the past with this IP. Do you see any interesting ports? I think that those ones in the middle are quite interesting. 3306 is the default port for MySQL. 3389 is the default port for RDP, remote desktop protocol. So maybe let's see later on what can we learn about those ports. In general, it's good to analyze the whois information, and this IP it belongs to the Cloud One host. This is a hosting that when you check their products, they usually offer some hosting of VMs, VPSs connected with offensive security, for example, Kali Linux, Parrot security, you see Tor hidden services. So that type of VMs. And let's go to the analysis of the port 3389, so RDP. And here you can see in Showdown, this is a screenshot from Showdown, that there was accessible port and RDP connection to the National Bank of Kenya. And this is not an IP associated with this bank. So what happened here? So it's very likely that the adversary that operated this command and control server managed to tunnel out the RDP to this C2 to connect, for example, with their client and operate with this machine using this C2 infrastructure. So we can find some evidence that one of their victims was National Bank of Kenya. But if we analyze the port 8080, which like it was presented before, was associated with the new tool, new Python backdoor, we don't see much information. Showdown tells us that this is a kind of a HTTP proxy with bad request answers. And in my research, I learned that if the new Python backdoor was used, it was used in the beginning of the year, in February, in March. So not in July, not in August, like it is written here. So are there any traces that this IP was connected with this Python backdoor? Maybe it's better to understand what kind of backdoor it is. So I also took some strings from this image, and I tried to pivot with those strings. And if you put this string into Google, you get only 7 results. And the first result points you to the GitHub of the project Ihrshell. This is not a human resource project. This is actually the backdoor that is written in Python, Python 3, and is supported by Flask. So the framework for web applications. And maybe we could try to analyze with this project to get some indicators, to get some patterns that will help us track this actor. If you take this string and, for example, check VirusTotal, you can see that there are not many hits. And this is probably the reason why this actor uses those capabilities, because as you see, after compiling of the client, so the backdoor to the Windows executable, there's only one detection on VirusTotal. And that's probably the reason why they try to experiment with new tools. They do not want to, maybe they do not know, I don't know, how to obfuscate, how to bypass. So they try to experiment with easiest option, try to find new tools, and maybe use them because they have very low AV detections. If you look into the source code of the server PI, so the server component of this command control, you can see that it is based on the Flask Tornado server, and there should be some indicators of this Tornado server. And when I compared it with the information from Showdown, I found only one day when this response was present, was captured by Showdown, and it is related to the server, Flask server offered and used in this server component. So maybe let's dig more with that. The best way is to just git clone this project and try to experiment on your own with the project and to analyze the responses. So when I try to send requests with curl to this C2 component, I got quite same HTTP responses. If you look at the headers, so the headers here are very similar to what was indexed by Showdown. I will go back to the previous slide so you could now compare that the red parts here are also present in this response that was captured by Showdown. It was captured in January, at the end of January, at this IP. So we are always talking about this one IP of this infrastructure associated with GrabZone. When we go further and for example, let's try to look how popular this Werkzeug HTTPD is in Showdown. So we get a lot of results, but if we focus on the very specific version of this server and we use those numbers, Werkzeug and Python with this exact numbers, so the number is quite low. It's almost 300. If we try to narrow down those results and, for example, use some HTTP headers, which are quite unique for this project, we could find that there are 11 results, for example, of the servers that have headers like X-frame options, same origin, or XSS protection with mode block, quite low number. So we are still not sure if every of those 11 IPs is connected with the C2 infrastructure. Rather not, because other headers are different. But this is quite low number, and we could approach this topic to find new infrastructure a little bit differently, but we will have to be more active, because this was like a passive reconnaissance. We could do some active checking. And for example, if we go to the source code of this project, we can see that there is a registered root in this source code for asset commander. So for example, when you use curl and send the get commander without slash, now you get very specific response. There is a 308 HTTP response, which is a permanent redirect. And this is very unique for this project, that for this specific request, there is such a permanent redirect. And when you also send the get commander with the slash at the end, then you get the response 200, so the normal positive response that there is such asset. So this is something very unique to the Ihrshell server component. So what can we do to track this infrastructure? For example, in Census, we could use such a search. So we focus on the Werkzeug server, we focus on the specific headers like same origin with no sniff options, but we are looking for 302, so the redirects. This is also typical for Ihrshell. And to be 100% sure, if we want to take the risk, and we can try to check and send the active request to such server. This is the same query, but the same logic, but for Showdown. And you can see there's a syntax for Showdown. You can check the response, which has a minus sign here, because I'm not looking for the 200 response, because I am asking only for the root asset. What are other C2 fingerprints that were present on this IP? For example, there was quite specific SSL certificate. And if you take the subject of this certificate and try to find out and pivot with this information, you can find another IP on the internet that is present with same subject. This is not a hard link. This is very low confidence link. You cannot say that this infrastructure is all connected with GrabZone, but this is a link that you can follow and you can dig more. Another confirmation could be that both of those IPs are hosted by in the infrastructure that's belonging to OVH. What are other fingerprints interesting here? On another port in a different time, but the time that was when the server was operated by GrabZone, there is very specific HTTP response. Get file not specified in URL. So what can we do with that? Of course, we can go to Google and search for that string, and we can only find one resource. And this is an article about how to create a file hosting server in Golang. So this is a simple way how probably adversary, in this case GrabZone operators, wanted to download the other tools from the victim computers. Why I think that it is from victim computers? Because they modified a little bit this project and added special header to the response, the header that will not stop the browser to download a file when there is a conflict between the extension and the real MIME analyzed by the browser. If you look for any of the servers that has such a response in the internet, you can only find this one IP. So this is not a big infrastructure. You can see that no other people use such implementation for. So this is not a popular project. Probably that it was written years ago by somebody, by a blogger. They found it and tried to use it in their purpose. But this could be very good indicator to find there another infrastructure when they, for example, begin another operation. They set up new server. This could be also a good indicator to hunt them. That's the way how you can find it in Showdown. You can use the hashes of the HTML, so the response, so the body, and that's the way. Oh, and this is also the way how to. So here previously we talked about hunting the infrastructure. Let's say a bit about hunting the client component. For example, after compiling the source code of the client to the exe file, there is a very specific resource and a manifest file. This is presented here, and this manifest file is present in all the executables compiled by PyInstaller. And when you check it, for example, in VirusTotal, you can get only 15 files, and this is a very precise hit because all those 15 files are related to this project, so the client of the Ihrshell. You cannot say that this is for sure GrabZone, but then you can get the list of the backdoors, and then you can decompile them, analyze, and maybe take out the C2 server, which is included there, and enrich this information further. Anything else suspicious on this IP? So For example, here we can see the response. This is a typical default Matterpreter response. It was present in February, March, April. So this group also used Matterpreter during their operations in spring. There is also a PS Empire hosted on 21st and 22nd of January. However, we cannot connect this activity with this group. Why? Because on the 24th, the SSH and the fingerprint for the SSH service changed. So it may indicate that this box, this server was just a new build. We are not sure that this is, I don't know, updated server or reinstalled server by same actor. Everything what happened on this server from 24 to up to now could be with some moderate confidence associated with one actor, one adversary. Of course, we need to gather more evidence for that, but I clustered those activities from January, from the end of January till now, to one group. Everything before, I cannot be sure of that. It's worth noting, worth marking somewhere, tagging, maybe with lower confidence, but nothing for sure. Even in December, there was a Cobalt Strike hosted. There's a typical Cobalt Strike default response, but no hard evidence for clustering. So to sum up, GrabZone 2020. In 2020, this group uses Python backdoors like Ihrshell, RGRAD. This is information actually from ONET services and from their operations, and they share the information publicly. They use Matterpreter, they use RDP tunneling, probably they use ngrok for those RDP tunneling. They use tools downloaded via victim browser, and for that they use this Go file server. They use Ihrshell, and quite unique is hosting in the company Cloud One Host. And the victims, we learned in this investigation that they hit National Bank of Kenya. We saw that they were quite successful. No hard evidence about the final impact on the victim. If you think that this is an interesting subject, I also recommend you go and check the ONET Services blog. And for example, this document is very fascinating because this is the history of Forkbombo intrusions, their OPSEC failures, and also the offensive operations carried by ONET Services. You can find out the screenshots from the adversary machines, so how the operators from ONET Services spied on them, and really recommended reading. Yes, so thank you generally for the attention. For myself, it is a very fascinating subject. I'm going to continue the research tracking of those groups, and I think that it's something new, especially the kill chain, this physical access, the usage of other tools made it quite interesting area to dig more. And there are still many of the unknowns. I'm still a learner, and I take a lot of information, and I'm trying to enrich them with my analysis based on the samples, based on the information that are taken out by the brave men from Kenya, and thanks to them, we can learn more about what happens in that region, in that threat landscape. So thank you again.